Teen Wolf doesn't really have filler episodes. Every episode is largely focused on the season-long plot and moves it forward in some way. But Season 1, Episode 3, Pack Mentality is as close to filler as this show gets. The episode opens with a dream, where Scott loses control of his abilities and attacks Allison. Scott believes it might have really happened, but Stiles firmly believes it was just a dream. He's proven wrong when the two find that same crime scene outside their school. Scott panics, but upon finding Allison, learns that he didn't attack her, so the question is, who did he attack? They learn that it was a bus driver. Scott takes this as a sign that he needs to cancel his upcoming date with Allison, but Stiles stops him.
No, you're not canceling, okay? You can't just cancel your entire life. We'll figure it out.
At lunch, the pair, to their surprise, are joined by Lydia, Jackson, and their clique of good-looking friends. As they discuss the events of the attack, Lydia displays a surprisingly acute knowledge of distinguishing between wild animals.
Probably a cougar?
I heard mountain lion.
A cougar is a mountain lion. Isn't it?
Lydia invites herself and Jackson to Scott and Allison's date, pushing them to all go bowling, but Scott is a terrible bowler.
In fact, I'm a great bowler.
Scott and Stiles complain about the state of events. Scott goes to work, and we finally meet his boss, Alan Deaton. This scene is mostly focused on Dr. Deaton and the sheriff, who swings by on the guise of a checkup. By the way, didn't know Stiles has a dog. I don't think we ever see this dog again. The sheriff is still trying to determine the animal that attacked both the bus driver and Laura Hale. Could be a wolf, could be a mountain lion, neither of them truly know, but Scott draws parallels to his own dream/memory of attacking Allison and believes he attacked the bus driver. At the hospital, Scott visits his mom, but is distracted by a patient's room nearby. Scott finds the bus driver.
You okay?
No, Scott, he's not okay. He just got mauled and barely survived, but thank you for checking in. The bus driver freaks out and Scott gets sent away. An interesting little scene happens next where we learn that the burnt down Hale house is county property, so Derek can't legally live there. While he distracts the cop with his telepathic dog connection, you know, the one Scott had in episode 1 Wolf Moon, his eyes turn blue. Note that this is different from Scott's eyes, which turn gold. Scott swings by, has the audacity to ask for Derek's help despite sending him to jail, but Derek agrees, admitting that Scott might hurt or even kill someone, and that he has a responsibility to train Scott to control his abilities. Scott takes Derek's advice and goes down to the school with Stiles to try and relive the memory of what really happened there. As Scott walks through the scene, he begins to relive the memory of what happened that night, and it's filmed in such a way that Scott feels like he's actually there. Scott learns that he didn't attack the bus driver that night, he was trying to save him.
Which means you're not a killer.
They conclude it was Derek who was trying to kill him, and Stiles suggests that it's some kind of pack ritual where you kill a human together.
Because ripping someone's throat out is a real bonding experience?
I love this continuous thread of Scott never being dangerous enough to actually want to hurt someone, except Jackson. His instincts always kick in at the last minute, further proving that he is more of a protector rather than a predator. Date night is here. Scott is just as bad at bowling as we all thought he was. Meanwhile, Mr. Argent corners Derek at the gas station and threatens him, basically warning Derek to stay away from his family. Back at the bowling alley, Allison motivates Scott into harnessing just enough wolf power to score a strike. Lydia, the little sneak, tries to flirt with Scott in response to this shift in power, but Scott brushes her off. Which is fine anyway, because it turns out Lydia's kind of an incredible bowler.
That was sort of perfect form.
Was it?
Afterwards, Scott tries to extend an olive branch to Jackson despite doing nothing wrong, and Jackson threatens Scott again, saying that he's hiding something and he knows that he doesn't want Allison to find out what. At the hospital, Derek visits the bus driver, trying to get his account of what happened that night. The bus driver only says two things: "Hail" and "I'm sorry." Derek is confused why the bus driver would recognize him, and the scene cuts away as the bus driver dies. I say this specifically because we don't ever see Derek kill the bus driver. After the long-winded group date is finally over, Scott walks Allison home, and they share another kiss. And this time her dad is watching? Creep. Stiles breaks into Scott's house, freaking Melissa McCall out, and he tells Scott that the bus driver succumbed to his wounds.
What the hell are you doing here?
What am I doing? God, do either of you even play baseball?
Enraged, Scott confronts Derek about killing the bus driver, and we end up learning a lot of information, but they also fight a lot, so I'm gonna try and go in order. Derek says that he didn't kill Laura or the bus driver, and that he had come back to Beacon Hills because Laura went missing. She was murdered, and her body was used as bait to try and capture Derek. Scott doesn't believe him, threatens to tell everyone, and Derek attacks. It's our first wolf fight, and we see Derek's wolf face for the first time. It's kind of ugly. Their stunt doubles do a lot of work. Derek finally wins the fight and reiterates that he didn't kill the bus driver, but is also kind of reassuring to Scott.
I didn't kill him. Neither of us did. It's not your fault and it's not mine.
Scott doesn't give a fuck and blames Derek because Derek is the one who bit him. Except Derek, finally, after 3 episodes, refutes his claim. Like, dude, you could have cleared the air 2 weeks ago. Okay, stay with me for this part. Scott goes back to the memory of being on the bus, affirms that the werewolf on the bus was not Derek, but a third werewolf. This werewolf, according to Derek, is an alpha, which is like a super strong, more wolf-like werewolf. Unlike Scott and Derek, who are betas, and just have unfortunate prosthetics. Now, Laura came back to Beacon Hills to look for this alpha, who presumably killed her, and now Derek is back to look for him too. But Derek can't do it without Scott because the alpha bit Scott, making Scott part of the alpha's pack. Are we all on the same page? This line of evidence leads us to the conclusion that the alpha is coming after Scott, and that's why Derek needs his help. Say hello to the season's big bad. 3 episodes in, Pack Mentality has some freedom to experiment with structure. Rather than building toward a climactic event such as a lacrosse game or a house party, the plot moves backward by opening the episode with that event. In the cold open, we know that someone was attacked at the school. It might have been Scott, and he might have hurt or even killed Allison. As the episode unfolds, so does the plot. We learn that a bus driver was attacked, neither Scott nor Derek was involved, and we get answers about one of the season's big bads. The plot itself is mostly self-contained, which is why I refer to this episode as a filler episode, but because of that, we can slow down and spend some time with characters who aren't Scott. In episode 1, Wolf Moon, I spoke a little about how the characters of Teen Wolf are often written beyond their archetypes. Another layer of complexity is how these characters relate to Scott. Every character at their core is either a reflection of Scott or a reflection of another supporting character. A very simple example of this is Jackson and Lydia. Scott sees Jackson as someone who has the perfect life. He's captain of the lacrosse team, has a girlfriend, and is universally liked. Lydia is not necessarily someone that Allison wants to be like, but she is perhaps another role that Allison could have played in her life. They're both rich girls with predetermined ideas about who they should be and what it takes to maintain that identity. Eventually, those ideas will be challenged and turned on its head. For now, Lydia is kind of a foil to Allison, specifically in the way that she acts around Jackson. She hides certain parts of her intelligence, she's controlling, slightly narcissistic, she's the girly girl that Allison doesn't want to be. And this is not by any means an insult against Lydia. She's one of my favorite characters, but she just needs some time to understand the person that she wants to be. When you contrast the bitter relationship that Jackson and Lydia have with Scott and Allison's, they're clearly meant to highlight the more positive aspects of Scott and Allison's relationship. Neither character is controlling of the other, they like to be around each other, and they don't feel the need to hide parts of their personality from each other. Except, that part. If Jackson represents the life that Scott strives for, then Derek represents the life that Scott is afraid of. Derek, like Scott, is a werewolf, but he's an orphan, lives exclusively in survival mode, is largely shunned by society, and just plain miserable. Scott is not just threatened by Derek himself, but by what Derek represents. This is the life that Scott might have now that he is a werewolf. In return, Derek's qualities highlight what makes Scott unlike him. There will be significant examples of this later on. And then there's Stiles. I haven't spoken much about Stiles, and there won't be much to say about him for the majority of season 1. He is not an unimportant character, but rather a lot of important traits of his character in this season are developed internally, rather than specific moments of heroism. And those character traits are largely in response to Scott's decisions. Let's have an overview of what we've seen so far. I've described Stiles as more adventurous and perhaps reckless than Scott. He was the one who convinced Scott to come with him to look for the dead body, he frequently disregards his dad's well-meaning orders, and this is magnified by his erratic personality. But this doesn't mean that Scott thinks Scott is less important than him, something that some people who watch this show could also learn. In episode 1, Wolf Moon, Stiles effectively tells Scott that his life is over now that he's a werewolf. Scott disregards this warning and tries to create a balance between his life as a werewolf and his life as a normal teenager. By the end of the episode, Stiles has totally switched gears and wants to support Scott in this decision, affirming that he will be by his side. This isn't a character inconsistency, this is Stiles making a decision, observing Scott's actions, and then recalibrating. In episode 2, Second Chance at First Line, we see the same arc play out. Stiles thinks Scott's aggression will get the better of him and tells him that it's too dangerous to play in the lacrosse game. Scott pushes back again, although this time he feels more ambivalent about this decision than in the first episode, but ultimately things work out in Scott's favor and Stiles becomes more sympathetic to his plight. In this episode, Scott is worried about his group date, and it's Stiles who tells him that he can't just cancel his life now that he's a werewolf. It's a role reversal from what we've already seen, showcasing the internal development that Stiles has been going through and how he's learning to understand Scott's point of view. Throughout all this, there are throwaway lines here and there about how Stiles feels that he would be able to handle being a werewolf better than Scott.
Haven't you ever seen The Wolfman?
The original classic werewolf movie?
No, what?
You were so unprepared for this.
They're mostly for comedic relief, but in my opinion, they add to the character of Stiles. Overall, even if Stiles essentially thinks he'd make a better assault victim, he wasn't assaulted. So he can only make these conjectures based on what he thinks Scott is going through, not what Scott is actually going through. And that's what the first 3 episodes work to combat. In this way, Stiles is a reflection of Scott because he thinks he's a reflection of Scott. Unlike the other characters, Scott and Stiles have a more symbiotic relationship. They need to disagree with each other in order to understand the other person's point of view, and once they understand that view, they learn how to make better decisions for themselves. There is also a lot of werewolf lore we still have to unpack. Here are the latest developments. Werewolves can have different colored eyes. Derek has blue eyes and Scott has golden eyes, and the alpha has red eyes. We don't know yet what is the meaning behind these colors. Werewolves have longer memories than humans. It's not a huge character defining trait, but it's a fun feature that comes into play every now and then throughout the show. Some werewolves can turn into full wolves, like Laura. We don't yet know why. Wolfsbane is powerful enough to induce a shift in werewolves. It's the first in a long line of magical plants and herbs that will be introduced in the show. Within the werewolf hierarchy, there are alphas and there are betas. This also implies the existence of omegas, but they don't matter. Alphas essentially lead packs. They're the strongest, the most dangerous, can also turn into giant beasts, just like Laura. And betas are everybody else. This episode and previous plots were primarily focused on the werewolf threats in Scott's life, the conclusion being that he is unwittingly now in some supervillain's pack and that this guy is coming after him. But as we know, this isn't the only threat in Scott's life, and it's about time that we shifted gears.